Hey, it's William from Boxer 2 Valve back again for another episode of this project here on this R80 RT that we're doing. So last time we were working on the steering head bearings and got that all sorted out, but unfortunately one thing I forgot is I want to put in these roll pins. There's a hole here that they need to go in through and serve a couple of purposes in this application. I'm going to put fork gaiters on here like the old style bikes. And so that's kind of a locating pin for that on the bottom, and on the top it's a locating pin for the headlight ears that are going to be installed in this bike, which weren't previously there. So we're going to do that in a bit. I'm going to put these pins in, but I don't really want to hammer them in there with the triple clamp installed because I just don't think that's a good idea. I'm going to take it off, do it on the bench. You know, some other things that we've done, just kind of get up to speed on where we've been at. You know, this is kind of a long-term project, so sourcing parts and getting things organized is part of the deal. But check this out, had the fork sliders powder coated. They look really beautiful, and I think that's a nice upgrade for the bike. So those are back and ready to install. Also, when we took the rear wheel off, if you've been watching, you may recall that the rear wheel had just this incredible amount of wear in the drum, and I measured it, I deemed it pretty much unusable. There was no way it could be cleaned up and be serviceable. So I had to go out and find a new wheel. Got real lucky and came across this one. It's from one of my friends in Europe who had this thing. And so pretty cool. It's like almost like brand new. I think it has like almost no wear on it. It's probably has less than 1,000 miles on it. So big score on that. And since this wheel is so nice, and they can be reused, instead of powder coating, I'm just going to leave them the way they are, at least for now. And then the front wheel, we actually ran this through the vapor blaster. And something I always kind of wondered about, are these wheels painted? Well, at least in '85, I can say they probably weren't, because there was no paint came off. They just cleaned up and look like new. So if you got some crusty old wheels on your bike, you know, that's something we can do for you here too. And so I think the wheels are good to go. Put a set of Metzlers on here and just need the wheel bearings and brake discs and a few things, but that'll come later. Just kind of a status update right now. Let's get started with this one. All right, I got that triple clamp back off again, and I'm gonna put these roll pins in these positions here. You can just hammer them in. If you have access to a press, that works pretty darn cool too. That's what I'm gonna do on the first pin. We'll try to hammer the second one in. Just want to go in, so basically same distance as protruding top and bottom for the setup we're working on here. So that was a pretty easy way to do it with the press. Goes in clean, no problem with that. But we can also hammer wood in. Let's do that too. That sets up real nice on a set of blocks like this from the press or any surface you have. And then you can just line that up and tap it in. Okay. So there we have it. Put that back on. Okay, now let's have a look at the fork tubes and see what kind of shape those are in. Here again, I'm going to use these V-blocks, these same V-blocks I just used for putting those, hammering that pin in. So we'll look at the tube and set that in there, because this way they can be nicely rotated. And then I'm going to take my dial indicator and set that in there. Just preload that by a couple of millimeters. And you can zero it if you want to. But you can see when I spin these, what kind of run out do we have? Virtually non-existent. The dial indicator's not moving. These things are straight as an arrow. So they're technically serviceable. I'll check the other one too. Ever so slightly, 100th of a millimeter or so, definitely within spec. However, this is going to be a bike that we are going to keep around for a while and actually go out and ride it and put a lot of good miles on it. And these fork tubes, even though they're straight, they do show some signs of wear. I'm going to go ahead and just replace them but these are totally could be reused, and you could just polish them, for example, and run them, because there's no rust on here, no pitting really, and they are straight, and but they do show wear. You can really see it in here, those spots in here especially, and here on the back side here, like so. So we're going to go ahead and change them out. Now when it comes to fork tubes on the monolever version, there are two different styles. There's an early and a late. Now the early versions have a plug like this that screws into the top of the fork tube. And notably, it has an M8 filler plug that's recessed in here. It uses a 8mm Allen to remove it. And so that's, I think, production like 85, 86. And then somewhere a little later than that, you'll find that they changed the design altogether. Instead of there being threads in here, there's a plug that is basically pushed in against the fork spring tension, and then a snap ring is installed. And then that had a threaded part, had a big nut on the top. So when you take your dash pad off and you look at what you've got before you, or when you get it this far apart, you'll know. If it's threaded, you got the early style. And if you had to push that thing and take the snap ring out, then you got the late style. Now, as far as I know from BMW, they only now supply the late style. So if you have an early model, what's expected is that you upgrade all the other components. So that means you need that piston or that plug in the top, the snap ring, the big nut that goes on the top, and all the other things. Different plastic caps are used and all that sort of thing. Luckily, we have a source for both. So if you have a monolever, you have an early version, you're in luck because we actually have the reproduction fork tubes for the early version no longer available from BMW. So that's what I'm going to put in here in just a moment. And so to take these apart, there's a snap ring on the bottom. I'm going to take that out. Okay. And then you'll find, in this case it came right out, but there's also a shim behind that. And that shim is there to locate this lower guide here. Sometimes they get a little bit cocked in there. You have to kind of play with it, and don't try to force it. It needs to come out without any force, although you can bend the shim. So those are removed. And now the damping rod can come out like so. Now there's really nothing serviceable. These are very unlike the fork sliders and damping rods of the earlier models that had little piston rings in there and the bumpers and all that. There's a spring that takes the place of the old rubber bumpers, and there's this sort of Teflon sleeve here that fits in there just as a guidance and also as a seal for the damping rod, but there's really nothing to it. So unless you're replacing the fork tubes, there's really no reason to ever take these apart because there's really nothing serviceable in here, I would have to say, which is kind of nice. But in this case, we are changing it up to tubes, so there we have it. And so I'll go ahead and grab one of the new fork tubes right now. Okay, there's the tube. All right, there's the new fork tube. And before we install it, we really ought to clean out the inside because could be some who knows what from manufacturing and probably some sort of cosmoline or something to prevent it from rusting on the inside. So I'm just going to clean them out. And so a good way to do that is just take something like a towel like that, soak it in some solvent, and push it through with a long rod a couple times, kind of like cleaning the barrel of a gun, sort of the same concept. Okay, I pretty well saturated this rag in solvent. I'm just going to kind of set it in like so, and then push this big long screwdriver through. Yeah, it was clean. It's coming out pretty dirty, and yeah, a couple more passes, I'd say. Get that nice and clean in there. Okay, that's looking nice inside now. Okay, for now putting the damping rod back into the fork tube, there's a pretty sharp edge right in there. You kind of see it where I'm pointing that screwdriver. And the damping rod needs to be pushed in past that ledge, that little edge, raised edge. And most importantly, this little part here, which is the sort of a Teflon slider and also a seal, that needs to go in while still in that groove. And invariably, if you just try to push it in, once you hit that ledge, the thing's going to unspring and it's just going to pop off. As you can see here, it would do. It would hit that and it would come off. And then you'd have no damping. It would be a catastrophe. So there is a special tool, of course, from BMW to facilitate the installation. And the way that works is it's basically two of these little half shells. They're machined out of steel, and lay that in like so to hold that piece in. And now it's captive. And then you can then insert the tool all the way until it bottoms out. And now the damping rod goes right in like that. And now you know that that part's installed. And they're half moon so that you can remove the tools like that. Put these parts back in, circlip, good to go. So here again, chances are you don't have these tools, and I don't even know if they're available anymore. But so I had to put my thinking cap on a little bit and figure out how could you do this if you didn't have these tools, because there's no way that you can do it without some sort of aid that I can even think of. So did a little thinking and came up with, I think, a pretty cool thing. 1-inch PVC pipe from any hardware store. And then what I did was put it in the lathe and using a boring bar. Actually, the outer diameter is just about perfect for what we're trying to do. It's just that the inner diameter has to be machined out. I used a boring bar and I brought it down to the inside diameter of 31 millimeters. And most importantly is the wall thickness, because you have to be able to get past that. So here's what I came up with. I took that piece of PVC pipe, as you can see it's still got the stampings on it and everything, cut it in a lathe to get it down to 31 millimeters ID, and the wall thickness, something like 1.25 millimeters is kind of what I was looking for, 1.3. So kind of comparing to the original tool is like 1.3, let's call it nominally, millimeters. So that's kind of the most important thing, is getting that wall thickness about right in there. But it worked out slick. Didn't take long to make, just ran it on auto feed a few times through till I got down to 31 millimeters, and then put on the bandsaw and cut it in half, and then just deburred everything. So it's pretty cool. I mean, these tools totally do the job. Let's see if they work, though. That's the most important thing. I'm going to just pull this damping rod right back out again. And now we're going to try my fancy homemade tools and lay that in there just like so. And let's see, like that. I had it just like so. Just like the factory tool. A little bit of gap on both sides, and the seal is in place. And so now we're going to slide that in. Make sure those bottom out nicely, and then we'll just push this damping rod in. Hey, look at that. Works just like the factory tool, and it's about 35 cents worth of material and maybe 20 minutes worth of work. So now that that's in, this goes in the rest of the way. And then the shim. Now these shims are available in different thicknesses, so that we don't want that lower guide sleeve to be bouncing around in there. So hopefully this one's okay, otherwise you may have to order a thicker shim. But let's see. So now this snap ring needs to go back in. And in my opinion, snap rings are pretty much directional. You'll notice there's always a sharp side and kind of a rounded side. So the sharp side is the one that needs to be the one that's sort of in tension in the direction of falling out, of coming out. It's got these 90-degree snap ring pliers that are kind of easy to work with in this application. There we go. Make sure that clicks into place like so, so it's fully seated. And then we can kind of check if there's any particular play in that lower plug. It really isn't. So I don't think it's necessary to change out the shim. They're pretty precisely machined, so I think it's good. So there's one fork tube with the damping rod reinstalled, and let's get on to the other one. So here's what I was talking about before. This one, it's not coming out easily. That shim is like off to one side and it's underneath that lip. So when you run into that, just be careful and try to just lift that so that it comes out past that. Basically what happened is the shim sort of like was offset, centered. It was in that lip where the snap ring groove goes. And so don't force it. Just lift it up out of the way, pull it out like that. There we go, nice and clean in there. Right on. So same drill. Put this on, and just cause I'm going to use my homemade tool because I kind of think it's cool. Cool. And check this one for play also. See if there's any existing. No, looks good. Okay, so these are going to go back in the bike in just a minute, and part of the next step is we're going to need the lower triple clamp or top plate, and I've got that kind of in use right now. We're going to get it out. I'll show you what I mean. Kind of mocked up the whole handlebar concept in the meantime. I want to show you what I came up with. Right on, so here's the K75 handlebars and the K75 dash pad all mocked up on here, and it's turned out pretty cool. So we need to get this part off of there. So while I'm doing that, I'm just gonna actually show you in reverse order kind of what I came up with, what's gonna go on this bike. In order to do this, I put the controls on, the switches, to get the complete picture of everything. So I'm going to right now just chuck up these bolts in a vise. This turned out pretty slick. I actually did locate an ignition switch. I'll be getting that pretty soon, and the little covers. But those aren't important right at the moment. It just has to fit right. Now I did have to do a little modification. I'll show you. So here's what I did. Take these two bolts out. Here's the original stuff that came out. These are the bolts that were in there. As you can see, they've been welded to these plates. This would hold the dash pad on and all that sort of thing. So these are getting completely replaced. I figured out that the proper bolts for this application are M8 by 70 length and an M8 by 85 in the front. And that's the bolts that I'm using, and that's the right way to do it. And so what I did was I drilled and tapped 2 holes in the lower clamp. These are M6 holes that I drilled, tapped into M6 by 1.0, and then and I centered up, so you don't have to figure this out if you want to do this yourself. 12 millimeters up from the bottom is where I centered the hole, and then drilled straight through to where the bolt passes through, and then ran a tap through there. So pretty slick. And now that dash pad attaches. Now the dash pad needed to be modified just a little bit. I kind of, worked it out and really just cut this little sliver off. I marked it, and you can see where I cut that off so that it will clear the choke cable. So that's all I had to remove. And then on the bottom side, it was sitting a little high here because the controls are different on a K75. This dash pad needs to be sucked in a little bit lower to look good. So I used a rotary file, sandpaper type attachment, and just cleaned this out a little bit. I probably took about maybe 5-6 millimeters off in this area, kind of tapered out. And so when it's installed, it sits on there really nicely like that. So I think that's gonna look pretty cool. All right, so now in order to move forward, now that we've got all this stuff sort of masterminded for the future, when it gets reassembled, and so we can take the handlebars and all that stuff off, set them aside. My holes are drilled, good to proceed. I need that triple clamp to move forward with these forks. Here's another shot of those lower handlebar clamps so you can see the way I drilled and tapped those holes in there. This is kind of part of a multi-stage process because this part's going to come off and on a few times. I'll tell you why in a minute. But before I put it on, I just want to check it for straightness, make sure that it's not distorted. And so a straight edge on there, I can kind of see, check it a couple ways, but primarily just making sure that it's not twisted. This looks pretty straight, so it's good to go. And right now I'm just going to put it on there sort of loosely using the top nut, because the first step we need to do is put the fork tubes in. And what that entails is we need to make sure that they go in to the right height, insert it to the right amount. Later on, we're going to have to take this part back off again because we're going to be putting the headlight ears on. We're going to go in there like that. But that'll come later because that all kind of comes later with wiring and everything like that. But so right now, just get that snug on there. Now we can put the fork tubes in. Now chances are it's not going to slide in right on its own. We're going to need to spread it just like we did when we took it apart. So I'm just taking basically a standard flat screwdriver and set that up inside like so. Taps. Don't need much, just to spread it a little bit. And then it slides in without really any problem. So this is the whole thing I was beating apart for. I just go up until it just sits on there real nicely. Now I can remove that again. Put the pitch bolt in just a bit. Get the fork tube in there first. When you tap the screwdriver in, you can just watch it and you can see the split go up. It just simply doesn't take much. You'll see it expand, but gosh, I don't even think it's a millimeter that's needed. So since we're putting in these new fork tubes, we don't need to worry about which position they go in, but if they were the originals that we took out, we'd want to make sure that we marked it like we did. We marked it before we took them out. We wanted to make sure they go in the same position and the same side. But in this case, they're new, no big deal, no problem. Okay, I'm gonna get some new pinch bolts in there, and then we'll put fork seals in the sliders and get that all sort of going back in the roadworthy condition. All right, so I'm gonna use new bolts for the pinch bolts here. And just screw those in, finger tight for right now. I'm going to put new top plugs in because the ones that came out, they were kind of buggered up by somebody didn't have the right wrench perhaps, and they used a pipe wrench or something. So just putting some new ones that I got from BMW, and then so there's the washer goes on like so. Those can be reused. They should have been on there when you took it apart. Screw those in. Next thing you just want to do is tighten everything. You don't really need to like torque it to spec or anything, but tighten the center nut so it's on there seated well. And then tighten these top bolts. And if you have the later style, basically you're going to do the same thing. You're going to put the plug in and but then tighten down that nut that goes around the threaded portion of the plug. So it's same concept. And I like to do this before tightening the pinch bolts because they will, if needed, they'll draw up. They're still loose in there. When I turn it, the fork tube turns, so it's going to draw it up there. So that's pretty much that. So we'll have to take this back apart again when we put the headlight ears in. But for right now, that's where we want to be. Okay. Next thing we'll do is put the fork seals in, the fork tubes, and assemble that. So this is the special tool from BMW for installing the fork seals. No real tips on how to make this other than use a correct motorcycle fork seal driver. Most important thing is if you look at the fork seal, you'll notice that there's a bit of a raised edge on the seal. And so if you use a socket or something like that, you'd want to be certain that you don't smash that down, deform it, because it's a scraper. It's an important function of the fork seal. This tool has a little recess in there that goes into. So first thing I want to do is put a little bit of fork oil on these seals and then slide it onto the tool. And then that goes right in there. Just have it up on a block of wood. Okay. Just have installed them so they're fully seated in the opening. So I've decided to put fork gaiters on this bike, and so those will go on next. And the little hole there, that's gonna fit over that pin that we drove in earlier. The clamps can be put on now or they can be put on later. It's either way you like to do it. I'll just do them later. It fits up like so. Okay, the next step is going to be to just double check that the forks are parallel and aligned and that the forks can travel smoothly up and down, don't have to bind anywhere, that kind of thing. So in preparation for that, first thing I'm going to do, just for kicks, is put the axle through the fork legs and just verify that it spins well, it's free moving, because sometimes over the years, you never know what these bikes have been through. May have been over tightened or something like that, and it's just a good idea to figure out if there's a problem beforehand. So this spins nicely in there, as you can see. So that's good. Now we can go ahead and put the fork legs back on, and the fork tubes have a little bit of a chamfer, so just very carefully kind of get over that, past that lip, make sure that nothing folds over. There we go, and then it goes. Now, using a new seal ring, make sure you've removed any traces of the old seal ring, if there is any on there, before you put that on. And just put the bolt in from the bottom. Sometimes you can have a little trouble getting them started, but just have to kind of keep trying until you get a couple threads in there. There we go, and you can feel it's in there. Now we're going to have to come back and torque these in a bit, but so don't forget to do that, because you don't want to leave those loose. So just going to come right back to that in a bit. Okay, for the purposes of torquing those, it's going to be easier and better if the fork brace is installed, so that when you go to torque it, the fork slider is not moving. So I'm going to do that first. So the fork brace goes in like that with the longer angled side facing forward. And it's a pretty precision fit, actually. If you have to take care that this really fits in there properly, it'll almost snap into place like that. And then you know it's right. And then put the bolts in. These are Allen bolts. The earlier ones had this. Later on, they used kind of a different type of bolt, which is an external Torx, an E Torx. I'm going to change that to that later, but at one at a time. But this is what I have to work with at the moment, so those are going in. But the E Torx ones are kind of cool, because then there's a little plastic cap that fits over the hole. It looks really nice and finished. But these will also do the job. Bolts are just finger tight. Now is a good time to come in and torque these bottom fasteners. Okay, make sure you always check the torque specs out of your manual. Okay, now I'm going to put the axle in and see how it fits. Just loosen these up a bit here. There we go. Okay, so that spins nicely in there. Now you want to make sure that that's the case all the way up. The fork should almost fall on their own weight. You should be able to spin the axle throughout the travel. Now, mind you, this is still loose, these bolts. So now I'm going to sort of go beyond loose to a little bit tighter. And check that again. I'm going to basically just incrementally tighten and just keep checking to see if anything I do stops that action or changes that action at all. See, there's a little bit of bind right there. It didn't fall back down. So we have to see what's going on with that. Try a different one in the rear, a bit snug here. Definitely putting a little bit of a bind in there. So you just want to make sure, maybe there's just a little tweaking. Okay, in the end, it did require a little fiddling around with the fasteners. Tried tightening them or try tightening down in the top position versus the bottom and fiddling around just to get everything just lined up. But now at the end, I've got nice smooth action and the axle rotates. And so it's just, I think, a good idea to go about it that way with the springs out so you know you've got a nice action, because it's really easy to put a bind in the forks and you don't really know it. It's just that the bike doesn't handle well, could cause a safety issue as well. So pretty good with that. And we're just going to torque these down to the proper spec. Okay, super. The next thing we're going to be doing is the brakes and the front wheel bearings, getting that all back and going. And we're making some modifications to the way the brake hoses run. We're going to be basically, there's a lot of work to do on the front end, but that's going to have to be for the next time we shoot a video. Don't have much time left today, but we do have time for is we're going to get the painted parts over to our painter, who's not too far away. Last little detail I need to work out is just removing this tail section. So I'm going to do that, and we're going to gather up the parts and head over and get the painter busy so that as we move forward with the project, the painted parts can be done kind of at the same time. All the bolts are, the fasteners are out of there, but we still have to remove the taillight lens because there's a couple more in there we got to get to. Okay, the taillight housing, there was two bolts in there are removed. The taillight housing is now loose on there, and now we can take this part off. And then one last little thing, there's a couple of fasteners, actually 4 of them, that'll have to come out, and then we can separate the part that's going to get painted from this bottom part of the rear tool tray compartment. Okay, that's out of there now. There's one of them that unscrewed from the fiberglass part, or whatever that's made out of, and the others, the nuts came off. So that's pretty common. Just to separate that nut off of there and screw that back in there, maybe a little bit of epoxy on there so it holds it in. That can all be done later. This one kind of backed out too. So we'll do that in a bit. So basically this thing's ready for the paint shop, except for the emblem. It's a shame, these are kind of crisp, but they got to go for being painted. So I'll show you how to take one of those off, the way I do it at least. Okay, get us just a small flat blade screwdriver and very carefully get in underneath the emblem and sort of peel up an edge. And then grab it with pliers. That's the way I do it. I do the same thing on the tank. In the meantime, I've been draining the tank. I should be pretty much empty now. Yeah, pretty much is. So the emblem's got to come off of there, as well as the fuel valves. Get the wrench for that. So you see there's a little bit of this red stuff here. And that's basically paint from inside the tank that they're painted inside. Sometimes it comes off. This doesn't look like it's maybe a big problem, but have a little bit of a closer look at that. Good thing it had the screens on there. That's what they're for. Also a little bit here. Because I'm just having a look inside the tank, and actually it looks really pretty good in there. There's a couple of spots where the paint got flaked off, maybe from the fuel nozzle going in, but I don't see any rust or anything. I mean, it's actually, and down around the where the petcock screw in, it looks pretty okay. So I think this is good. Now, if it was in a worse shape than this, I would say we recoat it. And for that, we have an excellent product by Fertan. And in a future video, we're going to do a video just on how to reseal a tank. But this one, I don't think resealing this one is probably not going to give us much advantage. So we're going to skip past that and head to the paint shop. Got all the parts collected here to go off to the paint shop. We get a helper to help me here. Hey, Hans. Hey, man, can you help me? I got to take these parts over to the paint shop.
Yeah, no worries.
And we'll just get stuff loaded in the car. This is my youngest son, Hans. He's visiting us from Germany right now. Hang on a second. Tell us a little bit about what you're up to over there.
Oh, well, I go to university over there, and I also play in the German Football League. And it's great being over there.
Yeah, so if you're into football as well as motorcycles, check out the German Football League, the GFL, and Hans is on the Dresden Monarchs, number 8 if you watch one of the games on the live stream. Let's get these things in the car.
All right.
All right. I think it'll all fit in the trunk. That's a bit of a tight fit. Okay, set. Hey, we might as well bring the dog too, huh? Hey, Odin, come on. Jump in there, boy. In you go. Good boy. Hey, Dustin. Hey, Mike. How's it going, man?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Got me some parts.
Yeah, I got some parts. Where should we put them?
Let's go back here in the paint booth and we'll start.
All right, we'll follow you. These couple parts are new.
Mm-hmm.
You know the drill, and you guys use Glazerite paint on this, right?
Only the best.
Only the best.
Only the best.
Yeah.
Not only is it a factory material for the BMWs, it's just they stand behind it. And it's definitely a great material to use.
Okay, cool. So what we're going to do, yeah, I agree. I mean, that's the right way to do it. We're using the proper paint for BMW motorcycle, and we're going to paint in Avis black.
Okay.
There's the color code.
Okay.
I believe that to be true. Double check me on that.
Okay.
And then when it comes time to stripe it, let me know, and then I'll bring a bike over that you can really, nail the stripes down to exactly where they're supposed to
Okay,
be.
awesome.
Perfect.
And it's all on top of the clear coat.
On
correct?
top, yeah.
Okay,
Right.
nice.
And there's no particular hurry because don't feel any pressure because we got quite a lot to do on this motorcycle before
Yeah.
we're ready for the paint work again.
Awesome. So full restoration on this one, huh?
Pretty much, yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Just
and then
as you
some.
guys do.
Yep, awesome, man.
Awesome,
Well,
man.
thanks so
Appreciate
much.
it. Yeah, no
And
problem.
show us a little bit about. So, by the way, we're at Maven's concept in Hendersonville, North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And Mike, tell us a little bit about what you guys do here.
So we do full-on restorations, a lot of show cars. As you can see here, we have a 67 Firebird that we're doing for a customer. So full-on frame-off builds. Some of the cars that we're doing have actually custom frames that we build from the ground up. There's really not much here that we cannot complete. So anything from a full-on show car to a street rod or a driver we can do. As you can see, we have all of our lathes, Bridgeport machines and everything, which come in handy for machining our own parts, those ready, hard to find pieces that you need just to complete a project. And without that, projects stay on standstill. So, all of this stuff is some of the stuff that we've made from 16 gauge steel that we hand form, and all of our metal machines that we have here. And on the other side is kind of more of the rough start. When it comes over here, it's more or less final completion and stuff that we're trying to mock up. So on the other side of the shop, you'll see like the real stuff, all the fabrication stuff goes on
Right
over
on.
there. Yeah. So.
Yeah, these guys help us out of a lot of jams when we need something special made. Really, really
We've
stoked.
made a couple tools for you.
You have.
I
You
remember.
definitely have.
Yeah.
And it's really great. I know my parts are in the best hands.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. We
All right.
appreciate you guys.
Let us know.
Thank you guys.
Talk to you later. All right, well, that's it for this episode. Really happy we got our paint work off in good hands. It's going to look really awesome, and it'll take them a few weeks to get that done. In the meantime, we got plenty more videos to shoot with the motorcycle back at the shop. And make sure you subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. And there should be some information down below about some of the parts that we referenced in this video. And we'll pick it up next time with all kinds of new things. So this is William from Boxer 2 Valve and Hans and Odin saying keep the shiny side up. And we're going to go back to the shop. Have a good day.